The psychedelic renaissance is here, and this is just the beginning. It seems everywhere you look, from Times Magazine to social media, people are talking more and more about their work in healing with plant medicines and psychedelics in their journey. And I personally believe that these substances are the future of humanity and have the ability to help us heal in ways that we have not been able to with traditional Western modalities. Now, just naming this, no doubt, brings up a lot of controversy and fear by those who are possibly listening to this that aren't familiar with the work that's being done. Which is exactly why, after 5 years of my own personal work with these medicines, I'm excited and ready to finally open up the conversation about the healing potential held in these sacred practices and medicines. And that's exactly what I'm doing here, boldly and courageously here on the podcast, answering some questions that are really important if this is a new conversation, a new topic for you. Things like, what are psychedelics? What are plant medicines? Are they actually illegal? How can they actually help us heal sugar addiction? So this is exactly what we're diving into in this episode. Stay tuned. Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. As always, I'm your hostess with the mostess, Danielle Dame, sugar freedom expert and somatic embodiment coach. And oh boy, I am a mix of emotions as I dive into recording this episode. And this is actually going to end up being 2 parts. So I want to give you the heads up on that. This is going to be a 2-part episode. And in this part 1, I'm going to be really diving deep into an overview and some very important information about psychedelics, what they are not, and plant medicines, of course. A little bit of history and some of my biggest takeaways from the recent Spirit Plant Medicine conference that I attended in Vancouver, BC. And then part 2 of this series, I'm going to weave this together for all of you to really deeply share what I believe is the tool that we can use these medicines to help us heal our sugar addiction. I'm going to share about my own healing journey in part 2 and my future vision and offerings in some really exciting announcements that I have really to share. So that's going to be in part 2. So I wanted to break this up because there's a lot to share. And this conversation is literally just the tip of the iceberg. But I want to start this conversation. And for those who have been listening to the podcast for a while, you know that this conversation was indeed started in a small way almost a year ago with 2 episodes where I actually brought my psychedelic therapist onto the show, Deanna Smith, to share a little intro about this work. And then my partner and I actually recorded an incredible episode where we shared the intimate details of our own experiences with the various medicines that we worked with at that point a year ago. So I'll link up both of those episodes below because they blend nicely into what I want to share with you today. And I also want to let you all know that this is just the start of a lot of conversations. This weekend at the conference that I attended, I met some incredible human beings doing some incredible work, and a lot of them have agreed to come on the podcast. So over the coming months, we're going to be having more specific conversations around more nuanced areas of the work that we can do and the specific plant medicines or psychedelics that are a possibility of working with. Now, this is a massive passion of mine, and it's also something that I acknowledge I have been afraid to talk about. And I want to just boldly and vulnerably share that here, that this work has been so potent and powerful in my own healing journey. And at the same time, I know there's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of false beliefs, there's a lot of myths, misconceptions, there's a lot of people out there who aren't going to get what I'm doing, and they're not going to agree with what I'm doing. And to be honest, that terrifies me. I am continuing to work on my own journey of people pleasing and perfectionism and essentially just worrying about what other people think. And this weekend gave me the strength to know that I have to record this episode. I have to speak my truth. I have to share about this tool, and I'm going to explain more about what this is and what this isn't. And you're going to learn something in this episode. If you're like a lot of my listeners, I've started talking about this in my groups and in my programs, and there's a lot of curiosity, right? And I think that's really important because many of you listening to this may not have anyone else in your life that you can talk about this with. So I want to, from my heart, extend to you an invitation that if this is a topic that you would like to learn more about and you're curious about and you have questions, I would like to be that point of resource for you. And I invite you to email me. I would love to hear from you. You are more than welcome to reach out. You can email me at support@danielledame.com. Of course, you can send me messages on social media platforms as well, on Instagram or Facebook, and we can keep the conversation going because this is really nuanced. It's really complicated. There's a lot to really feed into in this work, and it's not something to walk, it needs to be walked carefully into. So I also want to caveat here and share it before I get into more that I'm still finding the right words. This is such an area of research and work and experience that is oftentimes beyond the English language. So I'm going to do my best here. I'm going to stumble through these episodes. I'm probably not going to say things perfectly. There may be things that don't come out right. And you know what? I'm okay with that. This is me here leading by example in not being perfect. I'm going to be perfectly imperfect in this journey that I'm about to take you on of information and heartfelt experience that I know in my heart and in my soul is really important for me to speak about and to start speaking my truth on. So let's dive in. Let's dive even deeper. If I have piqued your interest already, I've got some amazing things that I want to share with you. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see that I have grounded myself here for this conversation in front of my altar. I'm here in the little corner of my office where my sacred space is created. I have lit the candles. I have brought in this element of ceremony because this is a big, important piece of how we walk into this work, is honoring the sacredness of it and honoring the deep reverence for the plants and for the medicines that can help us and guide us into altered states of consciousness. So for those who aren't familiar, right, I'm going to go over, what are psychedelics, what are plant medicines, and a whole bunch of sort of intro topics for those who possibly have this as a brand new idea for you. But a lot of this is coming from, and I feel so grateful to have had the opportunity to attend the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in Vancouver just this last weekend, hearing some incredible world leaders speak about their personal experiences and their hopes and dreams and visions for how these medicines can help heal ourselves and thus the world. I was honored to hear Gabor Mate speak in person, Paul Stamets, and some other incredible humans who have been very influential in this movement. And I'm going to share a very tiny bit about the history, but I'm not going to get too much into that because there's a lot of pieces here that we're needing to consider. So what was really neat about this weekend, and I'm going to share some of my biggest takeaways later in this episode from this weekend. One of the really neat things is that there was this room full of hundreds of people from every single walk of life, every ethnicity, every color, every profession. It was really neat to be in a safe, open-hearted space with people who are really working with the governments or working with policy to bring forth more clinical trials, to bring forth more studies, more access from a legal standpoint. So lawyers and scientists and doctors and therapists and psychiatrists, and then this whole subset of us, myself included, in what we call the underground. So those of us who are essentially operating outside the law, and I know some people are going to have some opinions about that, and that's okay. But this is really an important understanding of this movement, is that there is two pieces happening congruently, and they're both equally as important. We need the clinical studies. We need these more formal pathways for people who feel safer to access these substances through that means. And we also need these sacred ceremonial underground practitioners, shamans, coaches, healers, right? That can also hold the space for those who are, can't access those other more clinical pieces, because the access for those is actually really, really difficult. So to be able to offer this healing modality to as many people as need it or who are called to it, we need to have both. So it was really beautiful to be in this room with, and believe you me, this is still something I'm wrapping my head around. And I'm going to talk about misconceptions, right? Because I grew up in the same world that a lot of you did, right? Thinking about a lot of these substances as harmful drugs, right? And here I am in this room full of people with vendors selling drugs. And it was so surreal just to be surrounded in this environment with nobody judging nobody. Everything is okay. Everything was welcome. And there was so many really cool conversations that we can start to have that don't have to be had in like a back alley when you're talking to your drug dealer or something, right? Like we were just boldly being able to have these conversations about substances that are technically illegal here in Canada and the US in a really open and safe way, talking about our use of them, talking about our experiences, talking about how they've helped us heal. So it was really, really neat room to be in. Let's just say that, right? And these people who are, even government officials, right? Talking with us in those who are not maybe working in that realm. So really, really interesting. And as I mentioned earlier, a big part of one of the many things that I got out of this weekend is not only my own courage to speak up and share more details about this work and these substances, but also this courage to be vulnerable here. And I'm going to do my best to weave that into everything I share in these conversations, because it's important. And I can even recognize, as I'm talking right now, the fear in my body, the nerves, sharing things publicly, right, that are really private or really scary. And I'm being here with myself in that. And I ask that as you listen to what I'm sharing in these episodes, that you leave your bias and judgment out of it, and you understand and receive my heart and my truth with grace and with kindness and compassion and an open heart. Because the truth is, I've been harmed a lot. Emotionally, energetically, there's been a lot of hurt that has come forth for me because of my path with these substances. I have actually lost really important people, clients and friends in this space, because I am choosing a path that does involve working with these substances. And that is heart-wrenchingly painful. But I also know that this is my work here. And I know that I need to speak up and be the voice out there for those of you who are listening to this that need a safe space to explore your curiosity in this work. And that may mean that I lose followers and I lose clients and I lose people on my email list. And believe me, that is scary. I am sitting here right now terrified of that, knowing that what I'm going to share with you today is going to push some of you away. And not all of you are going to want to continue soaking in what Danny has to share. And that steps on a lot of my wounds. And I'm not going to let that stop me. I'm going to trust, right, that the flow of those of you who are listening that need to hear what I'm about to share, that you're the ones that are meant to be connected with me, and energetically trusting in this flow of ebb and flow with the people that come and go from my life. And I really appreciate you letting me share that and be bold in that fear that is showing up for me around losing people in my life, losing connections. while also making the choice to be fully in my power and fully speak my truth and my authenticity. And this is something that I so deeply attempt to lead by example with in exactly that, is being my authentic self and speaking my authentic truth, and being okay when and if people in my life are not ready for that or do not align with that. That's okay. So here we go. I know I've shared a little bit already, but I want to dive even deeper. So really important to start things off here is some warnings, okay? Do not try this at home. This is very important. There is a tendency, and I need to be very careful as I speak about this work, that this is not an invitation for all of you to go out and start doing mushrooms or go and do, LSD or go to an ayahuasca ceremony without deep contemplation and support in that process. This is not for everyone. This work is not for everyone. There may be some of you listening that are curious, but you're like, no, that doesn't align for me. And that used to be me. It took me 5 years. I'll share more in part 2 of this, of my journey of learning about this work and actually participating in it. It took me 5 years. So perhaps this is that kickoff point for all of you, but really important that you're not going out, you're not doing this, harm reduction is really, really important here. This is not something that can be forced. This is very vital. This work is not something that you can force. This isn't listening to this episode and then all of a sudden planning a ceremony with a shaman for yourself next week. This is really important that it needs to happen slowly. Do not just go out there and find some medicines and start doing this after you listen to this episode. And of course, major warning that we're going to talk a lot about in episode 2 is being very cautious about who you work with, right? And who you ask to guide you into these places of vulnerability and altered states of consciousness. So let's get into more details about what are these medicines? I kind of use the blanket term medicine because technically psychedelics and plant medicines and empathogens are all different. We also tend to use the blanket term psychedelics when people are now talking about these medicines, but they're not all psychedelic in nature. To me, psychedelic brings upon the idea and understanding of hallucinations, right? Or going somewhere else, leaving our conscious mind. And that's not the case with a lot of these medicines. You're very present. You're still in your body. You have all your faculties about you. So this is why I choose to use the word medicines. And I know that's kind of a blanket statement because you could also think of Tylenol as medicine, which I absolutely do not, but some people do call that. So I'm going to use some of those terms interchangeably, okay? And it's important that you understand they're all different, and ultimately these substances help us reach altered states of consciousness in one way or another. And what this can mean is accessing parts of our subconscious and energetic field that are not accessed normally through our day-to-day life, right? We know now we have ego, we have protectors, we have a lot of layers as human beings that we carry to our access. We know, I'm going to absolutely butcher this, but we know now, right, that we only use 20% of our brain. I think it's 20 or 30% or something. So what's going on in the other 70, 80% of our brain, right? And these substances are one of many tools that can help us reach these recesses of our brain and also of the universe. Now, I want to really point that out, that this is one of many tools, okay? A lot of people have this preconception that there's no other way to reach these altered states of consciousness, and that's not true at all. There are things like dance, hypnotherapy, breath work, all sorts of other ways that, intense meditation, that humans have been able to access the subconscious mind and these altered states of being and oneness with the universe. So this is just one of many tools. Okay, this is like therapy, right? Or your breath. These are tools to help you sink deeper into yourself in different ways. So we never heal on our own. We're always using tools, whether it's connecting with nature or going to a therapist, or like I said, just even connecting to your breath on a daily basis. These are all tools that we use in our healing journey to connect inward. And this is not a substance used to escape. Now, people can use it in that way, and that's where it's gotten a lot of its bad rep, right? But this is actually just one tool that helps you see yourself in a different light and understand your life and your situations differently. So as I mentioned already, not all of them are psychedelic in nature. When we think of psychedelics, we can think more maybe on the lines of magic mushrooms, LSD, ayahuasca. These definitely will take you into a majorly altered state of consciousness and perhaps bring about hallucinations, and actually not hallucinations. I wouldn't call them that. Visions. And then there's things like Cambo, which I just recently did, and MDMA and 3-MMC. These are very embodied practices. You're very present. You're still in your mind while also being able to access subconscious parts of your mind. Now, this is really important to understand that this is not new. This is not new at all. And I'm going to talk a little bit about history, but not a lot, because it's something that is so nuanced and really tricky. And I encourage you to do your own research on, but just important for you to understand that these plant medicines, the understanding that certain plants and substances can support us as human beings to connect higher with source and with the God in us is not new. Since the dawn of human beings, we have been using these substances in tribes, in the Amazon, in Egypt. We have proof that these altered states of consciousness were a major part of society, often for the medicine people. So for instance, a shaman would drink ayahuasca in order to access and download from the universe healing tools for a person who may be struggling with their health. So there's a lot of history here, and a lot that's very deeply rooted in remembering and the sacredness of the earth, right? These plants, where most of these substances stemmed from, a plant. This is like the OG traditional use of these substances, things like peyote, things like bufo, mushrooms, ayahuasca, right? These are of nature and have been used for centuries upon centuries since human beings existed. This is not a new concept, but it is a new renaissance that we are in. And I'm going to explain this in a minute. But what I want you all to understand here is that what these substances do is help us open our subconscious, where we can actually connect to our true authentic selves and the unity of the universe. So this may be God, source. It may be, being in the stars. It may be this experience of open-hearted love that reverberates through the whole planet. And in this work, we can actually heal disease and trauma at the root using these substances. And one of the reasons why I've used these on my path is not only to learn more about myself and to connect more with myself, but to go in to these sensitive places in my brain and in my nervous system and in my cells of my body where my trauma is stored and heal that trauma. So we have the possibility to go in with the support of these substances, to go in to the deeper recesses of our body and possibly out into the universe and heal and actually get into the root of the disease that we may be struggling with, understanding that disease at a different level, and possibly even removing the energy and toxins that are causing that disease in the first place. There is countless stories of humans, especially coming forth now more than ever, that we're able to actually talk about this because it's been underground for many, many years. But the stories of humans healing from cancer, diabetes, heart disease, autoimmune diseases, it's just inspiring. And until you start hearing these stories, you probably won't believe that, right? But when we understand that the root of disease is actually our energy in our cells and our nervous system, and is actually an imbalance in the body somewhere, when we can go in and remove that imbalance, that disease no longer has to be screaming at us, right? The disease is just our body yelling at us that there's something that needs to be healed. There's something that needs to be moved, or there's a blockage, or there's something there that needs to be, expelled from the human experience. And we can go in and actually do that. So one of the neat things, and there's a couple analogies here, but just to give you an idea of, I'm very blanket statementing a lot of these substances, because to be honest with you, every single psychedelic and plant medicine is vastly different, is very different. So if you were preparing for a psilocybin journey versus going into an ayahuasca ceremony or wanting to do some work with MDMA, those are all very different conversations that we would have about preparation and experience and what they can maybe support you with. So I'm being really vague here on purpose, because there's no one size fits all with these substances. And I'm going to talk about that in episode 2, like how do you know which one is going to support you the most, and how to sort of navigate into finding that in your area, either above ground or underground. But what I love about, again, in general, these substances, and again, trying to add some metaphors here for you to really sink this in, is what they help us do is imagine yourself on a ski hill. One of the speakers this weekend, Mark Hayden, absolutely love his work. He's going to come on the podcast as well. He's a very influential person in this space, especially here in Canada. He shares this analogy of the ski hill. So when we think of our neural pathways and we think of our belief systems, the way we view the world, the stories we tell ourselves on a daily basis. For example, I am worthless. Okay. This is a really big root core limiting belief that almost all women and human beings I know carry and work through. And it came from somewhere in our childhood, right? So we have this I am worthless belief, for example. And what these substances can help us do is this old belief is a track down a ski hill, right? It's this track that we have been riding for decades, since our childhood. We have been riding that track every single day. I'm worthless, I'm worthless, I'm worthless, I'm worthless, right? This is the neural pathway. This is the story, the belief, and we know no other way. And what these substances actually help us do is get to the top of that mountain and pause and look around, take a breath, take in the view, and in a moment, decide that we actually want to cut a new path in the snow. So instead of going to the right into the old track, the I'm worthless track, we can choose consciously, subconsciously, to choose a new path and to start building that new path of I am worthy of love, or I am amazing, I am magnificent, whatever the new belief is, right? Or the new pathway, the new way of being. Now, the old path never goes away, but the snow starts to fall on it. It starts to slowly get covered over. It starts to become less appealing. And outside of these medicine experiences, right? Once the day is over and you're back in your 3D human reality, the work is integration. We're going to talk a lot about integration because it is 90% of the work, is to choose that new path every day, right? And that might involve daily mantras or meditations or reminders around your house of like, I am magnificent and I am incredible, right? But it's choosing that new path. So the medicine has helped us create that new path. And now we have to solidify it, right? And that takes conscious effort every day. And this is where integration comes in. But this is, just a fun metaphor to share with all of you about this. Now, a little quick history is, again, these substances, especially the plant-based ones, have been used for hundreds of years by shamans, tribes, especially in times of difficulty. So in times of war or disease, medicine people would ingest these substances and receive insights from source, from Mother Earth. And we would be able to tune back into the oneness and the unity of human beings. Now, I highly recommend, if you're interested to learn a little bit more about the history here, especially what happened in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, definitely read Michael Pollan's book. It's called How to Change Your Mind. He wrote an incredible history. He's a journalist who studied, what really went on and happened. He actually even had a little Netflix series that I don't know if that's available anymore, but How to Change Your Mind. Because in the 50s and 60s, when LSD was actually accidentally created over there in Switzerland, and some of these substances were starting to be used by psychiatrists in clinical studies. Things like MDMA, LSD, and psilocybin were starting to be used in clinical studies around depression and anxiety and suicide, and PTSD. In a lot of different areas, they were starting to see huge results in the benefits and the life-changing experiences that can happen with one of these journeys. And when we access the love and consciousness of the universe, it's kind of impossible to be depressed. So they were actually seeing massive shifts in one journey for people in their life around anxiety and depression and, ailments that were harming them on a day-to-day basis. And in this process, the unfortunate truth of now we know kind of the world that we live in, the government control world that we live in. We'll say it how it is. We know this. If you're listening to this podcast, you're aware, hopefully, of what's going on with our food system and big pharma. Now, the sad truth here is that when humans become free of their consciousness, free in their mind, free in their heart, and are no longer riddled with anxiety and depression and disease, they cannot be controlled. Humans who are free in their mind cannot be controlled. Humans who are healed of disease cannot be sold drugs. And there is a very sad truth to the world that we live in, where there's billion-dollar industries that does not want us to have access to substances that are natural, that can help us heal without needing to be reliant on antidepressants for the rest of our lives, for example. So this isn't conspiracy theories. This is not it is well researched at this point what actually happened in the 50s and 60s when these studies were proving to really work for people is the war on drugs. So the governments came in and decided, nope, let's paint these substances in a horrible light and show people how dangerous they are, that they melt your brain. We all know the fried egg commercial that was shown, I think, in the 60s and 70s to propaganda us into believing that these substances are dangerous and that we cannot use them. And at this point, they quickly became illegal. All clinical trials were demanded to stop, even though the results were actually promising and really great. Why would you stop a clinical trial that's having success? I don't know. Questions to ask. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that, but really fascinating. Michael Pollan's book goes into all of that. And what's happening now over the last 10 years is finally we're seeing a resurrection of this. We're seeing a movement and a renaissance and a resurrection of the government even approving here in Canada and the US, approving clinical studies again with MDMA, psilocybin, with ketamine. They're actually doing some work again, finally. And there's a lot of really incredible people and even locally near where I live that are doing some amazing research and studies and really fascinating results, especially in the world of addiction, depression, anxiety, and PTSD. So this is why we're talking about this. I'm going to talk about in part 2 around how these can help us heal sugar addiction. So this is really, kind of where we're at now in history. I know I'm glazing over a lot of the history, but I want to share with you now my biggest takeaways from this conference that I just attended. And, having been in this work myself personally and privately for the last 5 years, a lot of this was really good reminders for me, or allowed me to integrate and bring forth a lot of concepts that I'd already heard about, but in a new way that I really understood them differently. Now, I'm going to share after this, I'm going to talk about some misconceptions here, but hopefully you're starting to understand things a little bit differently. I know that this is a really woo-woo conversation, and I absolutely love it because we have a lot of people who are really deep studying the woo-woo side of things, the truth and energy of what happens in our bodies. And then we have some amazing people studying the actual science. So brain mapping and doing MRI scans while people are in these medicines, seeing how they can actually, how they affect our physiology and the brain and our centers in the brain. Fascinating, right? Really fascinating. So takeaways from this conference, and really just major reminders for all of you as well. Number one, and this kind of combats one of the biggest misconceptions I see around this work, is that these substances don't are not like this movement and this work that we're doing. This is not about escaping yourself, right? There's a major misconception around like all these substances being drugs, right? They're illegal. The government has told us we can't use them. Therefore, they must be absolutely terrible for us. Now, we're not talking about heroin here. We're not talking about cocaine. We're talking about actual medicines that have come from the earth and been used for centuries. And yes, there are newer ones that have been synthesized in laboratories like MDMA and LSD and 3-MMC, and probably more. But essentially what these substances do, and this is really important, really nuanced and really important to understand, is that they're designed to actually help you dive deeper into yourself. So this is not escaping yourself. Now, not to say these substances cannot be used to escape yourself. And this is a conversation as well around being at home alone, ingesting these substances, having an experience by yourself versus intentionally being with a sitter, a guide, a somatic therapist, a psychiatrist, a doctor, with the intention and the purpose of understanding yourself better and healing. Massive difference. Intention makes everything different. So are you intending to use a substance, whether it's alcohol or sugar or LSD, to escape yourself? Or are you allowing these substances to help you actually learn more about yourself and heal the wounds that keep you possibly in addictive patterns with food? Massive difference. So these substances have the opportunity for us to dive deeper into who we truly are beyond the masks. Oh boy, do we have a lot of masks, right? We have so many layers of protectors from childhood. Our ego, our blinders are on day in and day out, and relearning how to fully be an open-hearted, authentic human being is very difficult work. And these substances can make it a heck of a lot easier. In one day, you can be blasted into your truth. And it is refreshing and it can be jarring and scary at the same time. So just this really big message that these substances help you have the opportunity to help you dive into your authentic self and the truth really of the universe. I mean, depending on what substance you use, right? They're all slightly different. And in that, the next piece here is this deep reminder. Almost every speaker talked about this weekend, right? Is this understanding that these substances are not healing you. You are healing you. You are the medicine. I loved this message this weekend. You are the medicine. These substances just help clear the cobwebs so that you can get into your true self and connect with your inner healer. This is what it's called in this space, is really understanding this deep healing that exists in all of us as humans beyond the layers that we carry. So when we shed the layers and we take off our masks, we can commune with and communicate with our inner healer and understand that the medicine is in us. It's not this substance that we took. This is a massive misconception. A lot of people will go into this work thinking, oh, this medicine is going to heal me. The medicine's not doing anything other than clearing the cobwebs so that you can heal yourself. This is really beautiful. This is really beautiful. And I want you to let that sink in because it's a major mindset shift, right? To connect with your inner healer. Another big takeaway here and another important message is that we cannot connect with others. And boy, are we starved for connection. I mean, this is one of the massive pieces that are keeping us in this disease cycle in our society, is being very disconnected. We can't connect with others until we are willing to connect with ourselves first. And these medicines can really help us do both at the same time, especially if you're partaking in a medicine ceremony that involves community, right? And traditionally, when we look at, say, the tribes in the Amazon, who are famous for, kind of getting using ayahuasca, using bufo, using things like this, peyote. This is always done in community. It is always done in a circle together. Everyone's doing it together. You're in it together. There's always a community element. And I think that's a really important piece of this work. Not to say that you can't do good work, on your own, one-on-one with a therapist, but there's also this point of making sure that you're connected in community with this and with these substances, because that is a big message that they carry to help remind us that we're all one, that we're all one, we're all the same, and we all want the same thing. And this sense of unity is what's going to change the world. So if we can have more humans having these experiences, how would that change our communities, our policies, our governments? Like, could you imagine if we were joking this at this conference, if all politicians had to have a journey with some of these substances? Like crime wouldn't exist, corruption wouldn't exist, lying wouldn't exist. So I know this is kind of a pipe dream and we may never get there because of the human complexities and greed and all these things that exist, but it is a hope that we can have and hold, especially with the use of these substances. So you can learn, right? I know some of these things I'm repeating myself, but you learn who you really are, and you can actually practice being yourself and become curious in these medicines about what's blocking you from being your authentic self. I've gone into many medicine journeys with that question, what's blocking me from really being me, or what's blocking me from feeling the joy of my life? And getting some answers around that so that I can then start to do the work to clear those blocks, so that I can continue to become more authentically me and hold my shoulders up and speak my truth. And I know a lot of you listening to this podcast struggle with that, struggle with using your voice, right? Struggle with setting boundaries, struggle with knowing that you're worthy of asking for what you need or what you want in this life, or dreaming big, right? And all of these things are those blocks, right? But when we can actually learn to live from an open heart, everything changes. And these substances can help us learn how to do that. They can also help us change the way that we see our challenges and problems. So this is really important. A lot of people also will go into these ceremonies thinking this is going to heal me and all my problems are going to go away. And I kind of giggle at that, because absolutely not. That is not what's happening here. And we will forever as human beings be faced with challenges and problems. We're never fully there. We're never going to be fully healed. We're never not going to be dealing with traumas or patterns or limiting beliefs or old stories that are bogging us down. But what these medicines can do is help us view our challenges, whether it was a traumatic childhood that you had, right? We can actually start to see through a different lens what happened, and bring in more compassion and understanding, not only for ourselves, but maybe for other people that were involved. And in that, we release some of the toxic energy that we're carrying around that trauma. It's really powerful, right? To be able to start to see not only yourself differently, stepping into your power, finding your voice, all these amazing things, right? But we can also start to see and understand other people's decisions and other people's mistakes in a different light, with compassion. So it's really neat, right? And I know that a lot of what I'm sharing, you're filtering through your conscious mind right now. And there's no embodied experience for a lot of you listening. And maybe some of you absolutely have had embodied experiences of what I'm talking about, but it is really strange. It's like trying to explain to a child how to drive, right? The child has no idea what you're talking about. They can kind of maybe visualize it in their mind, or like conceptually understand what driving is. But until that child grows up and gets old enough to drive, be behind the wheel, they're never going to actually know. So I know a lot of what I'm sharing is head knowledge, right? You're filtering this through your conscious brain, and it's not embodied knowledge, and that's okay. But this is a seed to plant for all of you. So some of what I'm saying might not make sense because it's from an embodied experience that I'm sharing a lot of this. Now, another massive message from this weekend that is very important. So listen up, listen closely. This is a massive mistake that most people stepping into this work will make. And I have also made it myself. And I've learned the hard way. Is that integration, I'm going to talk about what that is 95% of the work. Many people go into the ceremony, as I've mentioned a few times, thinking this ayahuasca is going to heal me and I'm going to be amazing tomorrow and all my problems are going to be gone and I'm never going to, be holding on to this disease or these limiting beliefs or this toxicity that I'm holding on to, and my life will be perfect tomorrow. That's not the case. The medicine work, the day you spend in medicine or in your journey is 5% of the work. Some people might say it's 10%. It's a small part. It's the seed that's opened these new pathways, these new ways of being. But your job is integration. And what that means is taking what you learned and the messages that you received from that journey and applying them in your human day-to-day life. And this is the hard work. That medicine journey is not the hard work, even if you've spent the whole time vomiting, which is a part of purging in a lot of these medicine ceremonies. So not all of them. Don't be afraid. And don't be afraid of that as well. It's actually a very healing part of the experience. But what they do is then give you the insights to make the changes that you need to make in your day-to-day life. And most people totally ignore that part. Right? It's like going to a retreat, right? And having this amazing life-changing experience at a retreat and then going home and doing the exact same things that you did before you left the retreat or went to the retreat. So it's so easy, right? To go back down that well-trodden ski path, the top of the mountain. But every day you need to be choosing the new path. And that is the work. And that is the commitment and the responsibility of doing this work. Gabor was actually speaking on stage and he was sharing like, essentially the sentiment, I don't remember his exact words, of if you aren't planning to properly integrate over the weeks and months after a journey, it is a complete waste of time. Do not bother doing a journey if you don't plan to take it seriously, that you are going to commit to the integration process. And many who spoke this weekend as well on the stage also shared the deep wisdom of the disrespect that we do to these very sacred and sometimes threatened plants and substances if we do not actually take what we learned and do something with it. There were a lot of people on the stage. I think Gabor was actually one of them that said, like, just take these substances, do the work, and then be a good person. Like, go and do the pieces that need to be shifted afterward. And this is the hardest part, in my opinion. It's the remembering every day that I need to set that new boundary or I need to make that decision. And there have been massive decisions that I've made based off the insights that I've gotten. And if we're not doing something with that insights, like, we are actually being completely disrespectful to the plants and the wisdom and the knowledge keepers who have been using these substances for centuries. So don't take this lightly. This is not something to take lightly. This is not something you can rush into, and you better darn be ready to integrate. Now, integration looks different for everybody, right? It can be like spending time, committing to journaling every day, to being out in nature, going slower. It could be having some tough conversations. A lot of my integration has involved having to have some hard conversations with my family members, with friends, with my husband, with myself. And then also making changes in your life. You know, perhaps that's quitting a job, right? Which you're not allowed to do within the first couple of weeks. No big decisions after a journey. First couple of weeks, you're supposed to let it settle before doing those things. Maybe it's setting a boundary. Maybe there's something you need to communicate with someone, right? Maybe it's starting to carve more time in your day for yourself because you've never prioritized yourself. So depending on what comes up for you in the journey, the integration is going to look different. But for many, that integration can take months or years. If there are big wounds that have been shifted, that's going to take a lot of time to integrate into your new way of being. So we can't rush integration. It's not like a checklist that you go through. It's really a journey, and why I am such a massive advocate of being sure that you have a support network in place. So working with a coach, a shaman, a therapist, someone who is guiding you in this journey that can help you afterwards in your integration process. That is massive. Having the accountability for integration and someone to bounce ideas off of or challenges that are coming up in your integration are massively important. Another lesson from this weekend that I want to share that is really impactful, and I'm definitely not going to say it as powerfully as Paul Stamets shared, but he really, and the sentiment was carried across all of the other speakers, is this truth that we have a legal, sovereign human right to our consciousness and to nature. How can something that is from nature be illegal? And yes, I get right? Of course, if there's endangered species or if we're hunting and, it's the last known bison, right? Like I get that, right? We might want to put some caveats around, not, extinct, making those species extinct. But most of these substances are not extinct or at threat of being extinct. Psilocybin mushrooms, for example, these grow everywhere. They're easy to proliferate. They're easy to grow. They're of nature. How can something of nature be illegal? Just some food for thought. This was really powerful when he was sharing this, right? Like we have a right to explore and navigate our subconscious minds and the consciousness of the universe. And who is benefiting from blocking our accessibility to even know those parts of our brain and our being? Just a question. Who benefits from that? Who benefits from keeping us asleep? So this is big. This is big stuff, right? And this understanding that I forget who it was that shared this, but this is another takeaway, right? Is this understanding that our human experience is actually a bridge between the spirit realm and Mother Earth and nature. We are this bridge from like this upper realm of the universe or God, whatever you want to call it, and the earth below our feet. We are this like conduit for energy, for information. And there's a lot that we can choose to do or not to do with that. All right. So the last biggest takeaway here is really this understanding that we do have to tread very lightly as we walk into this work as a culture, as a society, as an individual, because it is becoming more popular. And in that, there are going to be a lot of not so great things happening, right? We live in a capitalist society, a patriarchal society. There will be people attempting to make money, to possibly rip off, or there will be some shadow side practices that do exist. There's also the challenge around accessibility. Right now, the legal pathways for people who are curious in this work are extremely inaccessible. They're very expensive. They're very time consuming. There's a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy. So accessibility, even around cost of these experiences, is something that is really being talked about. There's the risk that we run for a lot of people who should not be guiding or supporting in these journeys, actually doing this work, right? We've seen a lot of harm being done and often hear only about those stories, right? Where people who are possibly pretending they're shamans, guiding people through ayahuasca journeys down in Peru and actually causing a lot of harm because they're not actually shamans and they haven't actually been trained. So there's a lot of difficult challenges for making sure that you are going to be held in a safe space with the right people. There's a lot of, there's just a lot of capitalist practice, a lot of money-making practices that are going to be a challenge, as well as quality control, right? Like knowing where we're going to get these substances from, especially within pathogens and synthetic substances, right? We know things like fentanyl is now being added to, can be added to anything. So how can we make sure that the quality of supply, especially as this work becomes more and more popular, gets kept safe? A lot of things to consider, right? A lot of really important things to consider that a lot of these leaders that I met at this conference are working on. And I'm really, really grateful to people doing that work because it's really important, right? We need to be as safe and as respectful as we can as we step into this work. Okay, so I'm going to wrap things up here with some common mistakes and misconceptions. I've already talked about some of these. So this idea of these substances being drugs. Just because they're illegal substances does not mean that they're drugs. They're illegal because, not because they're dangerous, not because they're harmful, and actually not because they're addictive. By the way, all these substances are not addictive. They actually help heal addiction. And yeah, that's really important because it's a political game that is keeping these labeled as bad drugs dangerous. And to me, a drug is something that we can use, especially when we're talking about these substances, that we would use to escape ourselves. So similar to sugar, right? And this is a big difference, right? Is we can use sugar to escape ourselves, to numb out of our emotions, to escape our experience, to fill a void, or we can use these substances to deeply heal. Again, this intention makes a massive difference. Are you taking these substances to party and go to a festival and just have a good time? And sometimes maybe that's okay as well. I don't have any judgment about that. But that is continuing an escapism pattern, which of course I'm very passionate about in the work that I'm doing with addiction, right? Is we have to be very cautious where we're using things to escape. And that can be Netflix, Instagram, it can be peyote, it can be mushrooms and ketamine. Like there's a lot of ways that we can use those substances to escape. And at the same time, we can choose to walk into use with those substances as medicine, as a tool to look at our traumas, go into these ceremonies. And that is always how I've approached this work is I'm going to uncover and heal some traumas, my emotional blocks, my shit, my baggage. And that is a massive difference between a drug and a medicine. And I don't let the government tell me what is what. I know what is what. Again, the misconception here as well around needing to take something to heal, right? That's very disempowering. It's like, oh, now I need these substances to be able to access these parts of my consciousness and my trauma and heal. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this is one tool. And remember what I said earlier, all these tools, whether it's conscious connected breath work, ecstatic dance, drumming and chanting, right? These are all non-substance based ways that you can elicit these connections with consciousness, with yourself, with subconscious patterns in your nervous system. All these are tools to help you tune into your inner healer. So these substances, yes, do involve taking something to help remove the veils and the masks that ultimately then help you do the work. So you're not taking something to heal you. That's very disempowering. That's very like outsourcing. This is very much about you stepping into your power and connecting even deeper with your truth and your sense of power. Another misconception, and of course what I mentioned before, is a lot of people talk about these substances being dangerous. They're dangerous. People die from them or get really high and jump off buildings. I know that was the propaganda they were sharing back in the 60s and 70s. And that's not the truth. Yes, these substances can be used in a dangerous way. Set and setting is a massively important part of this process. I'm going to talk about that in part 2. But the substances themselves are not actually dangerous. Most of them, again, I'm blanket statementing, most of them you actually physically cannot overdose on. Like I know for psilocybin mushrooms, for example, you physically cannot overdose. If you take a lot of psilocybin mushrooms, you take a 10-gram dose or a 20-gram dose, you are going to be in another world for a long time. You might be gone for like 10 hours and you might be seeing some dark things. You might be having a quote unquote bad trip. There might be some big shit coming up, but you will come back from it and you will be fine. You cannot overdose. You cannot do harm. Obviously, depending on your physical ailments, there are a lot of contraindications with this work. So I'm speaking very generally, right? Please seek out proper advice, right? Probably not from your doctor because they're not going to get it, but from someone who is in this world that does have medical knowledge that can speak to you about any medications you're on, maybe any physical ailments that you may have. But most of these substances are absolutely non-dangerous in themselves, but the settings in which people ingest them or experience them are what's dangerous. If you're alone in the woods, and you've just taken a couple tabs of LSD, then yes, you may die. You may hurt yourself. You freeze to death. You may fall off a cliff because you're not in a safe space. So this is really important. Another huge mistake I've already talked about is not integrating, right? People ignoring, they get the messages that like, okay, universe, got it. There's some things that I need to change. I need to do this stuff. And then they don't do it. This is a big problem, right? Choosing an unsafe guide. I've talked about that already. We're going to talk more about that in part 2. Looking for the right way to do it is another mistake that I see a lot of people making, and myself as well. When we get into this work, there's no wrong choice. There's no right choice. There's just the authentic choice. And a lot of people will come in with their perfectionism tendencies, which these medicines can be super helpful for, looking for like the right way to do it, right? The perfect way. Who's the perfect place, the perfect time in my schedule, all this stuff, right? So just being really careful around the expectations you might be carrying or any beliefs that you're even carrying into these medicine journeys. And then forcing it to happen. This is something you cannot do. I mentioned that earlier. We can't force it. Like I said, this took me 5 years of like percolating and integrating and understanding and connecting before my subconscious was ready to dive in to my first journey. So this is not something you can force. And this episode may be the seed for you that doesn't manifest into an actual journey either ever or for years to come. So this is really important that this isn't hearing about a new fancy supplement and then going to the store tomorrow and buying it. This is not something that you can just jump into. There's a lot of prep subconsciously and consciously that needs to be done before stepping into this work. All right. So this was a long episode. I know, a lot to share, and I'm trying to share it really quickly. I'm going to make sure there are a lot of resources in the show notes below this episode. And of course, as I said, please reach out by email if you have any questions or want to keep this conversation going. And in part 2, I'm going to be diving deeper into my personal journey and bridging the gap here now that we've laid the foundation to understand how these substances can actually help you heal your sugar addiction. And little sneak peek teaser, exciting updates about my future offerings and the work that I'm going to be doing here over the coming years in helping women heal sugar addiction with these substances. So little teaser, stay tuned. That is part 2 coming out soon. And I hope that you've enjoyed this and we can really just boldly start this conversation and walk into the understanding of this possibility for you as a healing modality. Again, final caveat and reminder, this isn't for everyone. This may not be for you. It doesn't work for everyone. There's no promises here, right? Just like, going to a meditation retreat, right? You may come out of it, nothing's shifted, right? There's no promises. We don't know. We're all unique. We're all different, and where we're at and what we're ready for is all different as well. But I hope that this has inspired you. I hope that this has planted some seeds for you and given you a little teaser. Again, I'm not an expert in this space. I'm sharing from my own embodied wisdom and knowledge, my own personal experience, and what I've learned, not only this weekend, but just over the years from my peers and other people in my communities that are deep in this work. Really grateful for all of them and really grateful to be on this path and to have this platform to share this all with you. I mean, how incredible is that? I'm so deeply grateful. And I cannot wait to keep the conversation going in part 2. We will see you there. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.